The notification popped up on my screen while I was stirring soup at the stove. A message not meant for me, sent to a group I didn't know existed. My reading glasses perched on my nose as I squinted at the bright light, my wooden spoon pausing mid-stir. "So we're agreed then?" my eldest had written. "Christmas at Grant's this year. Everyone brings something, and we don't invite Mom." I felt my chest tighten as I scrolled up, soup forgotten and beginning to bubble over. "She barely touched her plate at Thanksgiving," Troy had written. "Just pushed food around and sighed every 5 minutes." "The grandkids noticed," Valerie chimed in. "Penny asked me why Grandma was so sad all the time." "It's exhausting," Iris added. "Everything turns into her garden problems or her knee pain or some neighbor drama. When's the last time she asked about any of us?" Grant's response came last. "Let's not invite Mom this year. She's old and depressing. We'll tell her we're all doing separate small celebrations, then get together without her. She'll never know." My hand trembled as 4 messages of agreement followed, my 4 children, the ones I'd carried, nursed, raised alone after their father vanished with his secretary, unanimously deciding I wasn't worth including anymore. I set the phone down carefully, turned off the burner beneath my soup, and sat at my kitchen table. The Christmas cards I'd been addressing lay scattered before me, each one containing a check, $500 for each of my children, $100 for each grandchild. The same amounts I'd scraped together every year, even when it meant eating canned beans for weeks afterward. The tree in my living room corner sparkled with ornaments they'd made as children, preserved through decades. Presents wrapped in silver paper waited beneath. Gifts I'd spent months selecting, hiding away sale items I knew they'd love. That night, I slept with my ringer on loud, waiting for someone to call with the rehearsed excuse. Christmas Eve arrived with 4 separate texts, each with a different reason they couldn't include me this year. Coming down with something. Keeping it small. Kids have activities, doing a quick breakfast instead. Work party ran late, rain check? In-laws insisted this year, so sorry. I spent Christmas alone for the first time in 52 years. I set a single place at my table using the good china. I unwrapped my own gifts. The ones from me to them would stay wrapped, for now. I watched old movies and didn't cry once. As midnight came and my phone remained silent, not one of them checking to see if I was okay. The next morning, I started making calls. I called my sister Millie first. "They did what?" she sputtered when I told her. "After everything you've—" "I know," I said, cutting her off. "I need your help." Then my old friend June, who'd retired from the bank after 40 years. My doctor, who had been urging me to tell my children about my diagnosis for months. My neighbor Ted, who'd been offering to buy my house for years. By New Year's Eve, my phone buzzed constantly with panicked messages from all 4 children. "Mom, your card was declined when I tried to pay tuition." "Mom, the bank says you're not answering their calls about the house payment." "Mom, is something wrong with your accounts? We're worried." "We're all coming over at 8. Please be home. We need to talk." At precisely 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw all 4 of them huddled on my porch, their faces twisted with artificial concern. I watched silently as they rang again, called my phone, peered through windows. The door stayed locked because they weren't there for me. They were there because their credit cards had been declined, because the tuition payments for my grandchildren had stopped, because the down payments for their vacation homes had fallen through, because the monthly gifts I'd been quietly providing for years had suddenly vanished. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from those closest to you, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Drop a comment if you've ever discovered something you weren't meant to see. Sometimes those accidental discoveries change everything. My name is Esme, and until that day, I'd believed I'd raised 4 loving children. I'm 72 years old, widowed at 40 when my husband Harold died of a heart attack, leaving me with 4 children between 8 and 16 years old and more debt than I knew existed. The life insurance barely covered the funeral. I'd worked as an elementary school secretary before the children came, and thankfully the principal welcomed me back. But one job wasn't enough for a mortgage and 4 growing children, so I cleaned houses on weekends and took data entry work I could do at night after they were asleep. I still remember typing until my fingers cramped at 2 a.m., only to wake at 5 to pack lunches and start breakfast. For years, I averaged 4 hours of sleep. When Grant needed braces, I took a 3rd job stocking shelves at the local supermarket. When Valerie wanted dance lessons, I sold the pearl necklace Harold had given me for our 10th anniversary. When Troy's baseball team made regionals, I pawned my mother's silver to pay for the trip. When Iris got accepted to her dream college, I remortgaged the house I'd nearly paid off. I never told them about any of it. I wanted them to feel secure, to focus on their futures without worry. I'd smile through my exhaustion, cheer at their games and recitals, even when my eyes burned from fatigue, help with homework when my own mind was foggy with overwork. Mom always finds a way, they'd say, never questioning how. They grew up, built careers, married, had children of their own. Grant became an architect, Valerie a marketing executive, Troy started a landscaping business, and Iris taught high school science. They bought beautiful homes in nice neighborhoods, took luxury vacations, drove shiny new cars. What they didn't know was that I still helped them all. When Grant's firm faltered during the recession, I quietly paid his mortgage for 6 months. When Valerie divorced, I covered her legal fees. When Troy's business needed new equipment, I loaned him money he never repaid. When Iris wanted to send her daughters to private school, I contributed half the tuition without her husband knowing. All of this while living in the same modest house, driving a 10-year-old car, shopping sales, and saving every penny I could to help them. I never went on cruises like my friends, never remodeled my outdated kitchen, never bought the luxury handbags my daughters carried. 6 months ago, I started feeling tired, more than usual. My doctor found the cancer during a routine checkup. Stage 3, he said, but treatable with aggressive therapy. The success rates were good, but the treatment would be rough. I'd need help during recovery. I couldn't bring myself to tell my children. They seemed so busy, so stressed with their own lives. Each time I considered bringing it up, they'd check their watches or their phones would buzz, and they'd cut our visits short. When I mentioned a doctor's appointment once, Troy had rolled his eyes and said, "Mom, we all have aches and pains. It's just age." So I went to appointments alone. Sat in waiting rooms surrounded by patients with supportive family members while I filled out emergency contact forms with my sister's number. Drove myself home after preliminary procedures, pulling over twice when dizziness made the road blur. I'd planned to tell them at Thanksgiving. I'd rehearsed the words, trying to find a way to share my diagnosis without sounding like I was asking for pity. But as we sat around the table in Valerie's dining room, the conversation never turned to me. They discussed their jobs, their children's accomplishments, their upcoming vacations. When I mentioned my community garden had won an award, Grant checked his phone under the table. When I tried to tell a funny story about my neighbor's cat, Iris interrupted to tell a story about her coworker. I realized they were barely listening. I pushed my food around, appetite gone, and decided to wait until Christmas to tell them. Surely at Christmas, when everyone was relaxed and festive, they would have time to hear their mother's news. But then came the group chat I was never meant to see, and the holiday I spent alone. As I made my quiet Christmas dinner, I finally understood that I had failed as a mother. Not because I hadn't provided, I'd given everything, but because I'd raised 4 adults who couldn't see beyond themselves, who viewed their aging mother as an obligation rather than a person with her own struggles and joys. So when I started making calls the day after Christmas, I wasn't just hurt, I was awake for the first time in decades. I'd always believed that a mother's job was to shield her children from hardship, to give them wings to fly without burdening them with the cost of feathers. But standing at my window, watching their confused faces as they huddled on my dark porch in the winter cold, I wondered if I'd done them a grave disservice instead. My first call after Christmas had been to Millie. My younger sister had been warning me for years that I was being taken advantage of. "They're using you as their personal bank," she'd said during our last argument. "They don't even see you anymore, just what you can give them." I'd hung up on her then, but now I called to apologize. "You were right," I said when she answered. "About everything." The silence on her end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, softly, "What happened, Esme?" After I told her about the group chat, about Christmas spent alone while they celebrated together, she didn't say, "I told you so." She just asked, "What are you going to do about it?" For the first time in decades, I answered honestly, "I don't know." But as the day went on, clarity emerged through my hurt. My next call was to June, who'd been my friend since we were schoolgirls and had retired as a bank manager 2 years prior. "I need to understand what's happening with my finances," I told her. "All of it." June came over that same afternoon with a notepad and calculator. For hours, we went through my accounts, my bills, The automatic payments that left my account each month, payments that had nothing to do with my own modest needs. Esme, she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, do you realize you're spending almost 70% of your retirement income on your children and grandchildren? I nodded, embarrassed now to see the numbers laid bare. And the equity loan you took out last year? That wasn't for your roof repair, was it? I shook my head. Troy's business was struggling. He said he'd pay me back when things improved. June's pencil tapped against the table. Has he? No, I whispered. Things haven't improved enough yet. June set down her pencil and took my hands in hers. Things haven't improved because they don't need to. Why would they change anything when the current arrangement works so well for them? The truth of her words stung. For years, I'd been enabling their comfortable lives at the expense of my own needs, including my health care. The insurance would cover some of my cancer treatment, but not all. The supplemental policy I needed had seemed too expensive 6 months ago when Troy needed new landscaping equipment. My third call was to Dr. Palmer. When his receptionist answered, I didn't ask for an appointment. Please tell him Esme Walsh is ready for the treatment plan he recommended. All of it. Within an hour, Dr. Palmer himself called back. Esme, I'm glad to hear this. Have you told your family yet? No, I said firmly. And I don't want them to know. His pause spoke volumes. The treatment is aggressive. You'll need someone to drive you, to help at home during the worst days. I have my sister, I said, and my neighbor Ted has offered to help. My fourth call was to Ted himself. At 68, he was the youngest on our street, a retired contractor who'd moved in 3 years ago after his wife died. He'd been offering to buy my house ever since, saying he wanted to fix it up for his daughter's family. Your timing is perfect, he said when I told him I was finally ready to sell. But why now? You've always said you wanted to leave the house to your children. Plans change, was all I could manage. He named a fair price, more than fair, considering the outdated kitchen and bathroom, and offered a 3-month closing timeline with a rent-back option if I needed it. No, I said. I need it sold quickly, and I need it kept quiet. Ted didn't ask questions. He just nodded and said he'd have his lawyer draft papers immediately. My final call that day was to my lawyer, Mr. Garraway, who had handled Harold's meager estate decades ago and helped me with my will when I turned 70. I need everything changed, I said without preamble. My will, my advance directives, my powers of attorney, everything. That's quite sudden, Esme. Has something happened? The laugh that escaped me sounded hollow even to my own ears. You could say that. Can you come to the house tomorrow? I don't want to discuss this over the phone. The next day, Mr. Garraway sat at my kitchen table, his weathered briefcase open, concern etched on his face as I outlined exactly what I wanted. Are you certain? He asked when I finished. This is quite different from your previous arrangements. I've never been more certain of anything, I said. The papers were drawn up within days. I signed them on December 30th, my hands steady for the first time since seeing that group chat. Then I made one final call to my bank. I need all automatic payments stopped, I said. And I need my accounts restricted immediately. Ma'am, that's unusual. Are you concerned about fraud? Yes, I said, but not from strangers. That's when the frantic messages started. First from Iris, whose automatic mortgage supplement hadn't gone through. Then from Valerie, whose daughter's private school tuition hadn't been paid. From Troy, whose business account was suddenly overdrawn. From Grant, whose country club membership had been declined. None of them asked if I was okay. They asked what was wrong with my accounts. Their messages grew increasingly panicked through December 31st. By New Year's Eve, they'd coordinated amongst themselves and announced they were coming over at 8 p.m., ostensibly concerned about my welfare. I watched them through the peephole, huddled together, their faces twisted with confusion as they realized the doorbell wasn't bringing their reliable mother to solve their problems. I stepped away from the door, their knocking growing more insistent. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Valerie, calling for the 7th time. I sent it to voicemail and moved toward my kitchen, where a single suitcase stood packed with essentials. The rest of my belongings had already been moved to Millie's guest house, a charming little space behind her home where I'd be staying during my treatment. The banging on my door grew louder. I heard Troy's voice. Mom, we know you're in there. Open up. I moved to the back door where Ted was waiting in his truck, engine running. He'd offered to drive me to Millie's, concerned about me navigating nighttime traffic when I was upset. As I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. A text from Grant this time. This isn't funny anymore. We're worried sick. If you don't answer, we're calling the police for a wellness check. My fingers hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to walk away without a word, let them stew in their worry and confusion. But another part, the mother who'd raised them, who'd sacrificed everything, couldn't leave without some explanation. I quickly typed a message to all four. I know about the group chat. I know I wasn't invited to Christmas because I'm old and depressing. I'm fine, but I won't be opening the door. The house is being sold. The automatic payments you've relied on have been stopped permanently. We'll talk when I'm ready. I pressed send, turned off my phone completely, and stepped out into the cold night air. Ted helped me into his truck without a word, respecting my silence during the short drive to Millie's. You're doing the right thing, he said as we pulled up. Sometimes the people who hurt us most need to feel what it's like to stand alone. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. It wasn't triumph I felt as I walked away from 52 years of motherhood as I'd known it. It was grief. Millie was waiting at her back door, arms open. For the first time since seeing that group chat, I allowed myself to cry. Let it all out, she whispered, holding me close. Tomorrow's soon enough to be strong. The next morning, January 1st, I woke to 43 missed calls, 78 text messages, and 12 voicemails. I ignored them all and focused instead on the day ahead, my first oncology appointment with Millie by my side. Dr. Palmer seemed pleased to see me with support. The treatment plan is intensive, he explained, showing us the calendar of appointments. Twice weekly chemotherapy for the first month, then surgery evaluation, followed by radiation if necessary. I nodded, thinking of all the times I'd sat in waiting rooms alone over the past months, weighing treatment options against costs, wondering how to tell my children, deciding ultimately that I couldn't burden them with my depressing health issues. When do we start? I asked. I've scheduled your first treatment for January 3rd, if that works for you. 2 days away, 2 days to prepare myself for the battle ahead. As we left the hospital, Millie squeezed my hand. You need to eat something substantial. Treatment's rough on an empty stomach. We stopped at a small diner near her home, one we'd frequented as teenagers. I'd just taken my first bite of toast when the bell above the door jingled and Iris walked in, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. Mom, she cried, rushing to our table. What is going on? We've been worried sick. Millie stiffened beside me. How did you find us? Iris ignored her, focusing on me. Your neighbor said he saw you leaving with him last night. We've been driving around all morning looking for his truck. Her voice cracked. Why aren't you answering our calls? Why are you selling the house? What's happening with the accounts? I set down my toast, suddenly not hungry. Sit down, Iris. She slid into the booth across from us, her normally perfect makeup smudged, hair disheveled. Mom, whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Just talk to us. Us? I glanced toward the door. The others are still checking other places. I'll text them I found you. She reached for her phone. Don't, I said sharply. Not yet. Something in my tone made her freeze, phone halfway out of her purse. She slowly set it on the table, eyes wide. You're scaring me. Good, Millie muttered. I shot her a look. Iris, I said carefully, I know about the group chat. I know none of you wanted me at Christmas. I know you think I'm old and depressing. The color drained from her face. Mom, that's not... We didn't... Please don't lie. I read every word. Iris's eyes welled up, but I'd seen her cry on command since she was 7 to get out of trouble. It wasn't like that, she insisted. We were just worried about you. You've seemed so down lately. So the solution was to exclude me completely, not to ask what was wrong or how you might help. She fidgeted with her napkin. We thought a break might be good for everyone. A break, I repeated flatly. From your depressing mother. Those weren't my words, she protested. No, they were Grant's. But you agreed. You all did. Millie shifted beside me, her protective energy radiating. Esme, you don't owe her an explanation. Iris glanced at Millie with barely concealed annoyance. She'd never liked my sister, claiming Millie was too blunt and judgmental. In reality, Millie was simply the only person who'd ever called my children on their behavior. What's happening with the house? Iris pressed. And the accounts? Troy's business supplier is threatening to cut him off. Valerie says the school is demanding tuition payment. Grant's... Stop, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. I'm not responsible for any of that anymore. But you've always helped us. We count on you. The naked admission hung in the air between us. She hadn't even tried to deny it. Yes, I nodded. You've counted on me. All of you. For money, for childcare, for emotional support. But when have any of you been there for me? Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted around as if searching for examples. Do you know I've had 6 doctor's appointments in the past 2 months? Did any of you notice? Did any of you ask why I was losing weight? Why I seemed tired? You never said anything was wrong, she countered weakly. I tried. At Thanksgiving, I tried to tell you all. But Troy checked his watch. Valerie was on her phone, and you interrupted my story 3 times. Eventually, I stopped trying. The bell above the door chimed again. Grant strode in, followed closely by Troy and Valerie. They spotted us immediately, relief and irritation warring on their faces as they approached. Thank God, Grant exhaled. We've been looking everywhere. Your phones have been going straight to voicemail, Valerie added, sliding into the booth beside Iris while the brothers pulled chairs from nearby tables. Troy leaned forward, elbows on the table. Mom, what's going on with the accounts? My business is about to collapse. No, how are you, or we missed you at Christmas. Just demands about money. She knows, Iris said quietly. About the group chat, about Christmas. Their faces registered shock, then guilt, then quick calculations of how to manage the situation. I'd seen those expressions before, when Troy had crashed my car as a teenager, when Grant had been caught cheating on a college exam, when Valerie had maxed out my credit card. Mom, that was just blowing off steam, Grant tried. We didn't mean anything by it. We were going to invite you for New Year's instead, Valerie added. Make it extra special. I almost laughed. Is that why none of you called on Christmas Day? Because you were planning a New Year's surprise? They exchanged glances, caught in the lie. Look, Troy said, always the most direct. We screwed up. We're sorry. But cutting us off financially? Selling the family home? That's extreme, Mom. What's really going on? I took a deep breath. The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me expectantly, waiting for the explanation that would make everything make sense, that would return their world to normal, the world where Mom fixed everything and asked for nothing in return. I have cancer, I said simply. Their reactions were almost comical, jaws dropping in unison, eyes widening. Grant recovered first. What? Since when? What kind? Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Diagnosed 6 months ago. 6 months? Valerie's voice rose. Why didn't you tell us? I tried. You were all too busy. That's not fair, Troy protested. You can't just drop something like I have cancer into casual conversation. When is it convenient to mention cancer, Troy? Between discussing your landscaping contracts and Valerie's promotion, while Grant checks his phone during dinner? When Iris interrupts every story I try to tell? They had no answer for that. The treatment is expensive, I continued, even with insurance. I've been putting it off because I couldn't afford it while supporting all of you. Supporting us? Grant looked genuinely confused. Mom, we all have careers. We don't need your support. Millie made a noise that was half laugh, half snort. Tell her about the mortgage supplements, Esme. Tell them about the tuition payments, the business loans, the credit card bills you've been quietly paying. 4 faces turned various shades of red. They'd each believed they were the only one receiving help, that their siblings were managing independently. You've been paying part of my mortgage? Troy asked Grant, who looked equally surprised. You're covering the girls' tuition? Valerie asked Iris. I shook my head. No, I was. None of you were helping each other. I was helping all of you, at the expense of my own needs, including my health. But why didn't you just ask us for help with the medical bills? Iris pressed. Because you think I'm depressing when I mention my garden. How would you react to cancer? The truth of it silenced them all. I stood up, suddenly needing air. I'm selling the house to pay for my treatment. I've changed my will and financial arrangements to ensure I can take care of myself through this illness and whatever time I have left. You're all adults with good jobs and healthy bodies. You'll figure it out. Where are you going to live? Valerie asked, voice small. With me, Millie answered, where she'll be cared for properly. I nodded. My first treatment is in 2 days. After that, we'll see how things go. We'll help, Grant said quickly. Of course we'll help. We can take turns driving you to appointments, staying over when you need care. We can contribute to the medical costs, Troy added. Set up a schedule. Their sudden generosity might have touched me once. Now I just felt tired. I don't want your help, I said quietly. Not now. Maybe not ever again. Mom, don't be like that, Iris pleaded. We made a mistake. A terrible one. But we love you. Do you? Or do you love what I provide? None of them could hold my gaze. I need to go, I said. I have a treatment plan to prepare for. When will we see you again? Valerie asked. I paused, considering. I don't know, I need time. But what about the grandchildren? Grant pressed. They'll miss you. It was the first mention of my grandchildren, the ones I babysit regularly, take to activities, buy clothes for. Not once had any of them mentioned the children missing me at Christmas. You should have thought of that before deciding I was too depressing to include in your holiday. I walked out, Millie close behind me. Through the diner window, I saw them huddled in conversation, gesturing frantically, planning their next approach, no doubt. The following weeks passed in a blur of treatment sessions and side effects. True to their word, my children bombarded me with texts and calls offering help, sending flowers to Millie's house, even showing up unannounced until Millie started turning them away at the door. They're not really sorry, she observed one evening as I lay on the sofa, exhausted from chemo. They're just afraid of losing their safety net. I know, I whispered, but sometimes I still miss the children I thought I had. By February, the house sale was proceeding smoothly. Ted had been true to his word, offering a fair price and handling the paperwork efficiently. The money would ensure I could afford the treatments and recovery care without financial stress. My children's financial situations, meanwhile, had grown increasingly desperate. Troy's business suppliers had indeed cut him off. Valerie's daughters had been placed on financial probation at their private school. Grant's country club membership had been revoked. Iris had been forced to cancel a family vacation to Europe. They'd started helping each other reluctantly. Small loans, childcare exchanges, carpooling, things they could have done years ago but never bothered with while I was handling everything. Their messages grew less frequent as reality set in that I wasn't going to change my mind. By March, as I finished my first round of treatment and prepared for surgery, they'd shifted to weekly check-ins, more formal and restrained. Then came the day of my surgery. I'd told none of them the date, but somehow they found out, probably through persistent calling to oncology departments at local hospitals. As I was being prepped, a nurse leaned close. Your children are all in the waiting room, she whispered. They say they're not leaving until they know you're okay. I closed my eyes, torn between anger at the intrusion and a mother's instinctive love that never quite dies no matter the hurt. Tell them. I paused, unsure what message to send. Tell them I'll see them after, if I feel up to it. When I woke hours later, groggy and in pain, 4 anxious faces peered at me from the doorway. They entered cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal that might bite. The doctor said it went well, Iris ventured. They got all the visible cancer. I nodded slightly, my throat too dry to speak. We've been talking, Grant said, stepping forward. About everything. About how we've treated you. About what happens next. Troy moved to my bedside, unusually serious. We found your journals when we were packing up some of your things from the house. The ones where you kept track of all the extra jobs you took when we were kids. The pawned jewelry. The remortgaged house. We had no idea, Valerie's voice broke. All those years you never said anything. Would it have mattered? I whispered hoarsely. They exchanged glances. We don't know, Grant admitted. We were selfish kids who became selfish adults. But we want to change that. I'd heard promises before, seen temporary improvements that faded once the crisis passed. But something in their faces seemed different, a genuine shame I'd never seen before. We've made arrangements, Iris said. For your recovery. For after. And that's when they laid out their plan. We want you to move in with us, Grant said. We've worked it all out. You'll rotate between our homes, 3 months with each of us. We'll handle all your medical appointments, recovery care, everything. We've set up a shared fund, Troy added. Each of us contributing monthly to cover your medical expenses. Valerie leaned forward. The grandchildren are so excited. We've converted spare bedrooms into spaces just for you, with everything you'll need. And we've all adjusted our work schedules, Iris concluded, to make sure someone's always home with you. They looked at me expectantly, clearly waiting for tears of gratitude, for all to be forgiven. Their plan was practical, logical, and completely missed the point. And when I'm better? I asked quietly. When the crisis has passed? They exchanged confused glances. You'd stay in the rotation, Grant said. For as long as you need. Need, I repeated. Not want. Need. Troy shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we're trying here. I know, and I appreciate the effort, but you're still seeing me as a problem to solve, not a person to love. The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors. My surgery incision throbbed beneath bandages as I adjusted my position. What do you want then? Valerie finally asked, a hint of frustration leaking into her voice. What did I want? The question I'd rarely ask myself over decades of motherhood. Time, I said at last, to figure that out for myself. They left reluctantly, promising to check in tomorrow. When they were gone, Millie slipped in, having waited in the cafeteria during their visit. How bad was it? She asked, settling into the chair beside my bed. They had a plan all worked out. Very efficient, she snorted. Of course they did. What did you tell them? That I needed time. Millie nodded approvingly. Good, because I haven't told you about the offer yet. What offer? Her eyes sparkled with mischief. My travel agent friend Pat called. Those European river cruises you've always wanted to do? There's a cancellation for the July sailing. 2 spots. Fully refundable if your doctors say you can't go by then. Millie, I breathed. We can't afford. We can now, she said firmly. You've spent your life putting everyone else first. It's time to put yourself first for once. The cruise deposit was paid that afternoon while I was still in recovery. By the time I was discharged 3 days later, Millie had gathered travel brochures, mapped potential excursions, and started a packing list. My children were baffled when I politely declined their rotation plan, explaining I'd be staying with Millie until I recovered, then possibly traveling. Traveling? Troy echoed. After cancer surgery? If my doctors approve, yes, I've always wanted to see Europe. Their reactions ranged from confusion to hurt to poorly disguised irritation. They'd created a perfect solution in their minds, one that demonstrated their care while fitting neatly into their controlled vision of family obligation. But the grandchildren, Grant pressed, they've been asking about you. They can visit me at Millie's, I suggested. One family at a time for short periods while I'm recovering. They agreed reluctantly, and over the next weeks they brought the grandchildren in carefully orchestrated visits. The children were delighted with Millie's garden and the freedom to pick strawberries straight from the patch. They asked innocent questions about my special medicine and showed none of the discomfort their parents did around my illness. April turned to May, and my strength gradually returned. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about my prognosis, scheduling follow-up scans but suggesting I might indeed be able to travel by July if recovery continued smoothly. My children maintained their attentive check-ins, bringing meals, offering rides to appointments, asking what else I needed. On the surface, they were model children caring for their ailing mother. But I noticed how their attention wavered when I spoke too long, how they checked watches and phones, how they steered conversations away from my treatment difficulties. The old patterns remained, just beneath a thin veneer of newfound consideration. In early June, Ted called to say the house closing was scheduled for the following week. The buyers are eager, he explained. They've already measured for new kitchen cabinets. That weekend, my children arrived together, unannounced, at Millie's door. We need to talk about the house, Grant said, appointed spokesperson as usual. Millie showed them to the patio where I was enjoying the afternoon sun, then retreated inside after giving them a warning look. The house is sold, I said simply. Closing is next week. We know, Iris said. That's what we want to discuss. They explained they'd pooled their resources and wanted to buy the house from the new owners. They'd pay a premium to convince them to back out of the deal. We can't let it go, Valerie insisted. It's our childhood home, where our children have Christmas every year. The Christmas I wasn't invited to, I reminded her. They had the grace to look ashamed, but pressed on. We thought maybe you'd want to move back in eventually, Troy suggested. After your treatments, after your trip. The way he said trip made it clear what he thought of my travel plans. No, I said firmly. The house is sold. My life there is over. Mom, be reasonable, Grant argued. That house has been in our family for nearly 50 years. And now it will be in another family, one where perhaps the mother isn't excluded from holidays for being depressing. They flinched as one. Will you ever forgive us? Iris asked quietly. I studied my children's faces. These people I'd brought into the world, sacrificed everything for, loved beyond reason despite their flaws. I already have, I said truthfully. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or returning to how things were. It means I'm letting go of the anger but moving forward with clear eyes. They left subdued, unable to argue with that simple truth. The house closing went smoothly the following week. I signed the papers with a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The modest 4-bedroom where I'd raised my family, nursed my husband through his final illness, and lived alone for decades was no longer mine. In late June, my doctors gave approval for the river cruise. with some modifications and precautions. Millie and I spent evenings planning outfits, excursions, meals. I'd never traveled further than a neighboring state. She'd never been to Europe either. Our excitement built like children anticipating Christmas. 2 days before our scheduled departure, I invited all 4 of my children and their families to a dinner at a local restaurant. I'd been avoiding large family gatherings, finding them overwhelming during recovery, but this felt necessary. They arrived punctually, grandchildren scrubbed and on best behavior, spouses polite but wary. We filled a long table in the private dining room I'd reserved, the first time all of us had been together since before the Christmas they'd excluded me from. After the meal, as dessert was being served, I stood carefully. I wanted to see everyone before Millie and I leave for our trip, I began, and to share some news. They looked up expectantly. Forks paused midair. First, my recent scans show no evidence of cancer. The treatment appears to have been successful, though I'll need regular monitoring. A chorus of relief and congratulations followed. Second, I've decided what I want to do with the proceeds from the house sale, beyond covering my medical expenses. The adult conversation quieted, though the younger children continued whispering and giggling amongst themselves. I've established 4 trust funds, I continued, 1 for each of my grandchildren's education. Surprised murmurs circulated around the table. The money will become available to them when they turn 18, specifically for college or trade school expenses. That's very generous, Mom, Grant said, glancing at his siblings. There's one condition, I added. To access the funds, each grandchild must complete a senior project before graduation. What kind of project? Valerie asked cautiously. Community service. Specifically, volunteering with elderly residents at assisted living facilities. A minimum of 100 hours, documented and verified. Understanding dawned on their faces. I want them to understand that elderly people aren't just old and depressing. We have stories, wisdom, needs, and value. We deserve inclusion and respect, not just obligation. I held each of my children's gazes in turn, and I want them to see what happens to elderly people whose families have abandoned them because they're inconvenient or too much trouble. The message couldn't have been clearer. My grandchildren would receive financial support, but they would also receive an education in what could have happened to me, what happens to countless elderly parents discarded by busy children who find them burdensome. What about us? Troy finally asked. Is there anything left? I smiled gently. You've each received over 2 decades of financial support beyond your childhood years. That was your inheritance, given early and without conditions. The grandchildren get theirs with a lesson attached. The drive home was quiet, Millie respecting my need for reflection. Was it everything you hoped? She finally asked as we pulled into her driveway. I thought about the shock on my children's faces, the shame, the dawning realization that they wouldn't be receiving a windfall from the house sale, but also the reluctant understanding in their eyes as they processed the elegance of my solution. It wasn't about revenge, I said slowly. Not really. It was about breaking a cycle. 2 days later, Millie and I boarded our flight to Europe, my medical clearances carefully packed alongside my passport. As the plane lifted off, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The children I'd raised had disappointed me deeply, but perhaps their children would do better, armed with both education funds and the wisdom that comes from seeing the humanity in aging faces. My phone dinged with a message as we reached cruising altitude. From Iris, the kids are already researching volunteer opportunities. We're going to do better, Mom. All of us. I turned off my phone and tucked it away. Whether they did better or not was up to them now. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and it felt like the most nurturing thing I'd ever done. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the greatest strength isn't in what we endure, but in what we finally refuse to accept. What boundaries have you needed to set with family? Drop a comment below. Your experience might help someone else find their voice.